Hello, everybody. I'm Derek Arden, and welcome to Monday Night Live. Today, I've got an IT journalist all the way from San Mateo in California. I profess not to know where San Mateo is, but it is somewhere near Silicon Valley. Welcome, Dylan Tweney, to Monday Night Live. Thank you so much for joining us. Will you tell us what an IT journalist does and a little bit about you, please?
Well, hi, Derek. Thank you for the intro and thanks for having me on. An IT journalist, a tech journalist, has been pretty much my whole career. So I've been writing about and explaining and seeking to understand technologies of different kinds from when I left college. First, starting with the PC revolution in the 90s, and then the internet revolution in the late 90s and early 2000s, dot-com boom. Then the mobile explosion that happened about 10 years later, and then cloud and Bitcoin, and now AI. My job is to talk to people who are building interesting things and figure out what they're building and try to translate the ins and outs, the technical details into plain language. So for a long time, I was doing that for publications. The highlights were I spent 4 years as a senior editor at Wired, covering gadgets and a little bit science and the business of technology. And then I spent about 4.5 years running the news team at VentureBeat, which is a Silicon Valley news publication, covering startups and venture capital and the whole kind of economy of Silicon Valley, or larger than Silicon Valley now, digital entrepreneurial economy of the world. And for the last 10 years, I've been doing the same kind of thing, but not for publications. I've been doing it more um, for tech brands and for entrepreneurs and executives themselves. So ghostwriting, speech writing, and helping companies figure out how to express themselves better.
And what's the latest gadgets that you're writing about at the moment?
Well, I don't write about gadgets so much anymore, Derek. I write more about B2B technology. One of the sort of enterprise tech I realized in my career is often considered less sexy, because a lot of journalists and a lot of people want to write about Instagram or the latest iPhone, or whatever kind of glasses Facebook is making, and that's a lot of fun. But what I found and learned very early on is that there's a lot more value creation happening in enterprise technology, in technology that helps businesses do business better. It might not be as sexy, but in a way it is sexier because it's much easier to demonstrate a clear value and return on investment. When you install Salesforce.com and digitize your Salesforce, you can measure the productivity increase. But who knows if Google's latest glasses are going to take off or not? Who knows whether Instagram's going to take off or not? I can't predict that. It's fun to write about, but in business to business technology, it's there's a real payoff. So I realized that if you can talk about B2B technology and make it less boring, if you can convey some of the excitement of value creation and changing the way companies do business, if you can tell stories about that, you've got a really good niche as a writer.
How do you get the heads up on this new technology before it comes out? Because you need to be on the game, I guess.
Yeah, so as a journalist, you develop relationships. When I was working for publications, I would develop relationships with first the PR people and then the executives, and venture capitalists were often a very good source of information. And over time, you go to conferences and people learn that they can trust you, and if they give you information early, you will not publish it before the date that they're ready to announce it. Nowadays, I'm working with clients under contract, so they have an NDA with me, and that gives me, that means they can trust me because I'm under contract with them.
When you say enterprise technology, that really is things that will make the world a more efficient place. So isn't that AI? Isn't that ChatGPT? Won't that just take the world over or not?
Well, I mean, that's the big thing right now. I think ChatGPT has a huge impact both for consumers and for businesses, and all the AIs around it, not just the chatbots, but the other chatbots like Claude or Google Gemini, but also the underlying technology. And I think the way that business is changing is not necessarily by using a chatbot where you type into the box and get answers, but businesses are starting to build it into the underlying infrastructure. So maybe you submit an invoice and it goes into the invoice system and some AI does some processing on it before it gets and decides where to route it next. Or maybe, a doctor enters some notes about a patient and an AI kind of automatically does some analysis on that and suggests possible diagnoses. So that kind of integration of AI is absolutely changing the way that business is happening. Last week you and I were talking about using ChatGPT for writing, and I think that's maybe a different question, though. All right,
And well, yeah, what is the question then?
so I can talk about that. I think so. I did a survey recently that I published on my website, a survey of professional writers and content creators like me, and I asked them, "Do you use AI in creating content, in writing?" And over 80% of them said yes. Maybe 85%. It's a huge majority, 89% perhaps. A ton of people use AI. But then I asked them, "What do you use AI for?" And only about 30% of them said that they use AI for creating drafts. They use it for many other things, like doing research, helping them parse lengthy transcripts of interviews, helping them brainstorm headlines, helping them fix the grammar or brush up copy. But only a 30 odd percent are using it to draft the first draft of copy. And I agree with that personally. I am very wary of using ChatGPT or Claude or any other tool to draft copy for me because two things happen. One is it creates very mediocre copy. It's like it sounds really good, but it's actually kind of soulless. It's not coming from your heart. And believe it or not, even in business to business writing, you need to have some soul in your writing. People want to hear from other humans. They want to hear stories about people. And it's really hard to do that with a chat tool, which is by definition based on kind of an average of all the things that have been said by all people, right? So it's by definition, it's going to create something very middle of the road. But then a second thing happens when I'm using a chatbot that I find is even more insidious, is it kind of changes the way I think about what good writing should look like. And it kind of gets inside your head. You're like, oh, that's pretty good. I'll let that go. Or, you start to see more and more AI generated copy online. And you go onto LinkedIn today, and half the posts are obviously created by some kind of chat bot. And you're like, oh, I guess that's what it takes to make a successful LinkedIn post. And then you start writing that way, or you start thinking that's what good writing looks like. So I was talking to another fellow journalist a couple weeks ago, David Strom, and he said, what's going to happen is like the chatbots are going to get better and better, and humans are going to get worse and worse. And at some point, we're just going to meet in the middle, and it'll just be a sea of mediocrity, and nobody will know the difference.
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't want that future. I hold out hope that there's going to be room for human created writing because at the end of the day, I think humans want to talk to humans. We want to connect to other people. I really don't want to be in the position where I'm using AI to create a 5,000 word white paper, and then you're using AI to summarize the white paper into something more digestible. If I wrote it properly, it should already have a summary. You could get all you need from that, and then you could read the rest of it if you want the details, if it's well written. But it seems very inefficient to have us all translating everything through AI and making it mediocre.
How are schools and universities treating this in the US? We heard from Graham Jones how it's being treated in the UK quite carefully, but a thesis could be written by AI, couldn't it? What are the unis doing about it?
That's not an area that I've looked really closely at. I will say that every student is using AI. I guarantee it. They're all using AI. I think professors are using tools to try and detect copy that seems to be AI written. Those tools are imperfect. If you overuse M dashes, which I do, for instance, you run the risk of your copy being flagged as AI generated because apparently that's one of the things that the AIs do a lot, is use a lot of M dashes.
What's an
But
sorry, what's an M dash just for me?
oh, oh, sorry, I'm being a journalist nerd here. An M dash is one of those long. It's longer than a hyphen. It's technically it's the width of a letter M. It's a long dash in
Okay.
writing.
Yeah.
And people have been word nerds like me have been overusing M dashes forever. I think, this American poet Emily Dickinson used M dashes like crazy, and she was definitely not an AI. But apparently AI is overusing that. It's a stylistic tell, apparently, but it's not a very effective one. So professors are using that to try and catch AI generated papers, but I guarantee you students are using AI in the same way that the content creators are that I talk to. Some of them are writing papers, some of them are using it to help them with research.
Sure. Now,
Fact of life.
when we talked before, you talked about social media, and you talked about Twitter, and then Facebook and Instagram, and the whole development of that. And we also talked about the dangers that's having to people's health. Can you run us past your experience on that, please?
Yeah, so having studied the rise of social media as a journalist, I had a really firsthand look at this. And I think I was also really saturated in social media myself for a long time. I have a much more arm's length relationship with it now because what I realized is that at some point, the successful social media networks started using insights from um, from slot machine design to build their apps to make them more addictive. Now, slot machines, there's a whole there's a whole department at the University of Nevada in Las Vegas that has done tons of research into how slot machines work on the human mind and how addiction to gambling happens. They've got all this research, and the slot machine makers use this research to make their slot machines more addictive. So they do the same thing with social media apps and websites. And basically, what they're doing is looking for ways to stimulate the production of dopamine in your brain. And that's a reward chemical that you get when somebody clicks like on your post or when somebody responds to your post. Um, and the reason that this works is dopamine is very addictive. You get in this dopamine cycle and you want more dopamine. So you you continue to post more or you start looking for stories that, excite you. And this is good for the social networks because Facebook wants you to spend as much time on Facebook as possible. Elon Musk wants you to spend as much time on X as possible. And it turns out that the most effective way to provoke that kind of engagement and stimulate dopamine production is through outrage, is getting people fired up and angry. So you've got addictive apps that are designed to make people angry. And I think that is a recipe for disaster. It was not good for my mental health. I think writ large, it is not good for society.
When you say angry, how do they do that? Can you give us a simple example?
Well, I would say like the post that you're much more likely to see because of the way the algorithm works is Donald Trump did this insane thing. Or look at how outrageous this thing is that's happening at the border or in the Ukraine or in Israel, right? Or in Gaza, right? It's like, look at how crazy that is. You are much less likely to see a story saying scientists have discovered that crime is at an all-time low.
But that's what newspapers have been doing for years, haven't they? They're not peddling news;
Absolutely.
they're
And
peddling
as a
negativity.
journalist, I am not, I don't have clean hands, Derek. I'm a journalist. Like we had to survive first by selling newspapers and then by getting people to click on our headlines. So I learned how to write headlines that provoke that kind of interest. However, I never had the benefit of an app or psychosocial, psychochemical research, and I didn't have the benefit because I was a tech journalist of, there's a saying in American newspapers, if it bleeds, it leads. Maybe that's a saying from TV news, but basically, if there's something gory that happened, that's going to be your top story. My top story was always like, Apple ships a new iPhone or Google updates its algorithm or something, right? But so I was a little bit distanced from that because I covered technology. But but yeah, when you're running a social network, you have all this research, you have uh, apps that can be designed for maximum engagement, and you have literally the entire world full of outrageous stories to select. Outrageous or wonderful stories. So the algorithm is just going to kind of, I don't think it's necessarily malicious, but the algorithm is going to lead you to stuff that will provoke more of a reaction and more engagement.
And you said it affected you as well at some stage in your life.
Yeah, I realized, for instance, that the more I used Facebook, the unhappier I was. And I gradually came to realize that this was because there's another phenomenon on Facebook. This is actually, this is interesting. A mathematician studied this. There's in network theory, there's a law that everybody that you see on a social network mathematically is going to have more friends than you. And it doesn't seem like that would make sense. It would seems like everyone would have the average number of friends. But actually what happens is people who have more friends show up more in a network, right? So like they're more likely to be your friends. So you're going to see more people who have more friends than you. So other people on Facebook are always going to be more popular. And because of the way people don't post about the crap that's happening in their lives, they post about the good things. So everybody on Facebook is having more fun than you. So you wind up feeling, even if you're looking at a bunch of positive stuff, you wind up feeling like everybody's more popular, better looking, and having more fun than you. And that's my explanation. I just found that it wasn't good for me. I kept going back to it and I kept feeling worse and worse. And when I finally realized that, I was like, you know what? I got to put this down.
Mm. And of course, it's having a huge effect on children,
Yes, I
teenagers.
think it is. Yeah, I see it in my kids. Although I will say, you know, my kids are deeply saturated in social media because they grew up in it. My daughter's 24 and my son is 18. But I think I've seen in the last couple of years that they have an ability to disengage from social media. They might spend 6 hours on, or 3 hours on Instagram chat and TikTok, but they also know how to unplug. So maybe there's some hope. Maybe they've evolved some ways of coping that I don't have.
You use the term psychochemicals, which I quite like. I think I know what it means. How do I get some of the psychochemicals that I want, like oxytocin and endorphins?
Oh, I love this. Okay, I didn't know this conversation was going to go this way, but okay, oxytocin. Well, hold a baby, hug a loved one, spend some time like talking with a friend face to face, hold hands with your spouse. That's oxytocin producing. Um, Endorphins, you can get, my favorite way of getting endorphins is jumping into cold water in San Francisco Bay. I just like jump into the water, swim 20 minutes, come back, towel off. Whew, your body will be full of endorphins, Derek. Um, and then serotonin is the other one. This doctor wrote a really interesting book a couple of years ago called Dopamine Nation, which is about how American culture is completely dominated by the pursuit of dopamine. But one of the things she talks about is the balance between dopamine and serotonin in the brain. And I am not a neuropsychologist, so forgive me if I botch this, but basically dopamine is the pleasure chemical. It's like you feel dopamine after you get some ice cream and eat that. Serotonin is the happiness chemical. You get that by living well, meditating, being fully present to the wonders of life, not eating too much ice cream, getting exercise regularly, having relationships, that are meaningful to you and so forth. Which,
Great.
by the way, I don't think technology does anything for serotonin right now. Yeah, I mean, it does. Well, okay, actually, I'm going to back up a little bit because I think things like this on Zoom, where we've got a bunch of people and we're connected to each other, and you and I are having a meaningful conversation and we're getting some meaningful questions coming in here that I haven't even looked at yet. I think that's serotonin producing because we are creating connections here. We're relating to each other and online, and I think that's very serotonin producing.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dylan. Can I change the subject now? You've interviewed some high-profile people, but the most high-profile person that you interviewed was having a wedding in Venice over the weekend and closed the whole of Venice down somehow. Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon. How did you find him? I'm just curious how these um, how these leaders come across, these people that are just so mega rich, they're off this planet.
I wish I had been able to interview him before his wedding this weekend because that is just so fantastically over the top, absolutely ludicrous. I was delighting in the coverage, both sides, his wedding and the protesters. Um, I met him about maybe 12 or 13 years ago now. So he was already super rich, but he hadn't become quite as bizarrely rich as he is now. I found him to be he's not a big man. He's a little short. He was wearing a leather jacket, very intense, very focused, clearly having a lot of fun in his job. He was still CEO of Amazon at the time. And I interviewed him because I was doing a story about this clock that he's commissioned that's being built in a mountain in Texas. It's a clock that's designed to run and keep accurate time without human intervention for 10,000 years. And he was like, I'm telling you, Derek, he was like a mad scientist. He was like a Bond villain or something, talking about, but in kind of a good, actually, he did have sort of a Bond villain laugh. When he laughed, it was a little scary. But he has this kind of mastermind quality to him where he's like, he's building this clock and it's going to run for 10,000 years. And he's really excited about it. He gets really excited about long-term thinking. And that is a project that's designed to really make people think about the very long term.
And were the people, did you see any of the people around him? Were they in awe of him? Was he, was he an autocratic leader like some of the leaders we have in the world at the moment, or was he
No.
collaborative?
I mean, it's hard to say how he is now because I've noticed that a lot of billionaires have kind of changed their tune since January of this year. They're all, for some reason, acting very differently now. But at the time, he did not seem autocratic. I think he instilled a very clear, rational culture in Amazon, actually a very writing centric culture. They're not a culture of doing lots of PowerPoint. They're a culture where everybody writes a memo. And then when you have a meeting, they spend the first 10 minutes, everybody just silently reads the memo and then they have a discussion. So it's a very intellectual culture and very rigorous. But I have never, from him or anybody who worked closely from him, I've never gotten the idea that he was autocratic.
Okay.
No.
And were you overawed by him?
No, I mean he was disarming with that laugh that I mentioned. It was a little bizarre, but he was very charming and it was great fun to hang out with him for 20 or 30 minutes and then I tagged along while I was with a photographer and they did a photo shoot with him and that was fun. He was completely casual. He's great.
Changing the subject again, you're very strong on the use of weasel words. You don't like needless words in journalism, in books. You call them weasel words, not an expression I'd heard before.
Oh, a
So
weasel word, Derek, is a word that is like you're trying to waffle. You're trying to squeak out of things. So like, this is very important, or this is we have seen almost every executive behave this way, or these kind of you're trying to make a really strong statement, but then you back away from it with something like almost or nearly or you know
so you get
some.
would you get rid of all those words, would you?
I don't want to be categorical about it, but or autocratic, but I think, it's very easy to put in weasel words in your writing, especially when you're business writing, and if you can take out more, your writing will be a lot stronger.
And what about headlines, Dylan?
So headlines, I think there's some tricks for making better headlines. Um, the first trick is write 5 or 10 versions and try to do it in different ways and see what comes up. Actually, it's a good idea. You can use ChatGPT or any other chat bot to do this now too to help you brainstorm headlines. I still think it's a good idea to come up with 5 headlines on your own, give that to the chat bot, and then say, can you give me 5 more alternatives? Because then you've given it a start and you put some thought into it. Um, it can be useful to incorporate numerals into a headline. So like 5 ways that you can make your presentations better. Put that number in there. Um, Being very concrete about a benefit that is offered like that, making your presentations better. And then if you can, saying something provocative is always a good thing. The thing is, I think a lot of people approach writing headlines as they might approach writing I don't know, a scientific paper or something like that, where they want the headline to summarize everything that's in the paper. And that's not actually the function of a good headline. In journalism or in blogging or what have you, the function of a good headline is to get you to click. It's to intrigue you and make you want to click to read more. So, yeah, so maybe we should say something outrageous and provocative in our headlines to get people
I mean,
to be outraged.
I read over here that the headline writers get paid sometimes 5 times more than the journalists get paid for writing a sexy headline.
Wow, I should move to the UK.
No, you wouldn't like
I
that. No, no, the money's not good over here, I can assure you.
I suspect they do a little bit more than just writing headlines. When I spent most of my career as an editor, and I did write a lot of headlines, but I also did a lot of editing and managing of people. So there's a little more to it than just sitting back and waiting for a story to come in and writing a headline for it, I'm sure.
Okay, before we finish, I got one more question in the chat box I want to ask you about. Did the Chinese generative AI applications really follow a different development path to the Western ones, or did they just steal them?
That's hard for me to answer because I don't know the ins and outs of how the Chinese AI was developed. I think it's fair to say that every AI researcher in the world is well aware of what all the other AI researchers are doing. And there's a lot of, if not outright stealing, there's a lot of copying and imitating going on. But there's also, as in any kind of any area of scientific research, there's a lot of building on the insights of others. And I think what was it that came out late last year that freaked everyone out? DeepMind from China was it's just a much more lightweight model, right? Capable of running with far less processing power, but it was able to do that because it had benefited from all the research that had been done before in AI. And um, the West was, the U.S. frankly has been leading AI research until, all along. So anybody who builds AI now is building on what American researchers have done.
Brilliant. Dylan, thanks so much for joining us. One last thing, if anyone wants to speak to you watching this on YouTube or listening to this on my podcast channel, how do they get in touch with you and what can you do for them?
Well, I'd love to hear from anybody who wants to chat more about this stuff. My website is dylan.tweney.com. That's dylan.tweney.com. I've got a newsletter there where I write about writing and how to be a more effective content marketer, and then I write some of my own stuff too. And I can help people by speechwriting, ghostwriting, helping them craft a leadership way of communicating their leadership more effectively.
Brilliant. And will you put me on your newsletter straight away, please?
Yes, thank you.
Brilliant. And can I ask members of Monday Night Live to give Dylan the usual vote of thanks? Dylan Tweney, thanks for joining Monday Night Live. We hope you'll come back and join us again at some stage.
Well, it's been a blast. Thank you, Derek.